Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Katira Kapoor, and I have the privilege of being the Senior Director of Health Promotion, Wellness, and the creator of the Spark Your Health Talk series here at the 92nd Street Y. Thank you all for being here with us. This evening, Spark Your Health is joined by internationally recognized relationship expert Dr. Alexandra Solomon and psychotherapist Terri Cole to bring us their decades of clinical experience on the topic of healthy dynamics in relationships and much more. Our format this evening will be a moderated discussion followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Please feel free to submit your questions during the chat throughout the duration of the event. We hope you will join us for upcoming Spark Your Health events, such as Matrescence, the Metamorphosis of Childbearing, Pregnancy, and Motherhood, with Lucy Jones in conversation with Helena Weissing, coming up on October 17th. I would also like to thank our Spark Your Health Talk series sponsor, Mount Sinai Health System, for their generous support. I am now pleased to introduce our moderator this evening. I'm going to go ahead and bring you up, Terri. All right, Terri Cole, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Terri is a licensed psychotherapist and global relationship and empowerment expert and the author of Boundary Boss and Too Much. For over 2 decades, Terri has worked with a diverse group of clients. She has a gift for making complex psychological concepts accessible and actionable so that clients and students achieve sustainable change. She inspires over 1 million people weekly through her blog, social media platform, courses, and her popular podcast, The Terri Cole Show. Terri, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Kat, thank you so much for having me.
And we'll go ahead and add Dr. Solomon here as well.
How exciting. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Alexandra Solomon. She is one of today's most trusted voices in the world of relationships, and her framework for relational self-awareness has reached millions of people around the globe. A couples therapist, speaker, author, and professor, Dr. Solomon is passionate about translating cutting-edge research into practical tools that people can use in their everyday relationships. She's on the faculty in the School of Education and Social Policy at Northwestern University and is a licensed clinical psychologist at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. She hosts the hit podcast that I've been lucky enough to be on twice, Reimagining Love, and she's award-winning author of Taking Sexy Back, excuse me, Loving Bravely, and Love Every Day. I'm joking to death. Alex, come.
Hi, I'm Kat. Thank you so much for hosting us. I know it's just the space feels really well held. Terri and I have done many of these events, some together, many not together. And it's so lovely to show up in a space where things have just been kind of set so beautifully. Kat, you've created a really lovely learning environment for the two of us and for the folks who are joining us. So it's always good to be in conversation with you, Terri. And thank you to Kat and her team for making this happen.
Thank you for jumping in. I was choking to death. I would love to kick it off with you talking about relational self-awareness, the importance in relationships. I mean, this is your full-on area of expertise. So just give us some information about this, please.
Yeah, I think I think one of the reasons that you and I like collaborating so much is there's a lot of back and forth between our work. What I want people to do, because relationships are not going to become simpler and easier for us, we have to expand our perspective and we have to expand our tool. We have to add tools to our toolbox. We've got to expand our keyboards. We've got lots and lots of keys to play with. And to me, the best way we do that is by starting with ourselves, because we are the through line in every single one of our relationships. I think that can be a tough one to get, because what it feels like in relationships is if the other person would just stop being so, or be, I've been married 26.1 years. I can tell you that so many of my sentences could start with how this would be easier if Todd would just, or if my kids would just. That's kind of the easy place for us to go. It's real easy to see how the other person's participation is the problem here. And so then relational self-awareness is my framework that is about coming back again and again to the me as a variable. Doesn't mean that it's my fault. Doesn't mean that I'm the problem. Doesn't mean that I'm the only one who needs to change. But it does mean that everything that happens in our relationships falls along what I call the golden equation of love. My stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff. And so relational self-awareness is a commitment to really working with the dynamics, the cycles, the patterns, the choreography of relationships, and doing that with the utmost of curiosity and compassion. This is, again, not about beating ourselves up. It's not about throwing our parents under the bus either. So it's taking loving responsibility and being really curious about, like, why do I do what I do in relationships? And what are the patterns? What are the things that keep coming up again and again and again?
So I love everything that you've said. All of the description is so sort of easy to follow, where when you're in a relationship and there is this tendency to look outside of ourselves, because I, for sure, before I had a lot of therapy, thought it was most definitely everyone else until I had a brilliant therapist who was like, P.S., you are the common denominator in all of these relationships, Terry. It can't possibly be everyone else. But I love the encouraging people to come back with compassion, right? With radical curiosity of why do I do what I do, as you said. And, Alex, how do you see, should I say Dr. Solomon, how do you see,
Allie.
or Allie, um, our deeper understanding of our partners? So we have relational self-awareness of like what the me in all of this and what am I bringing, and how important do you think it is for us to understand our partner's background, triggers, traumas, experiences?
Yeah. It's so important. It's like sort of the other side of the coin. I'm developing this couple therapy certification program. And so today I had a chance to do a couple like demonstration sessions with real life couples who volunteered to be part of this, which is, I'm so grateful. And one couple they're multicultural. They have really, really, really different backgrounds. And one of the things that we talked about was how much clashing there was. I mean, there's a gender difference between the two of them, there's a cultural difference between the two of them, and there's also the sort of classic pairing of the engineer and the therapist. So in along many domains, they just have very different orientations to the world. And what's happening, that what they have both committed themselves to, is curiosity and patience. Those are the words that came up again and
Mm,
again. And those are not either their sort of like native tongues. For the engineer is like, tick, tick, like, let's just get to the solution.
right.
And for the therapist is like, no, 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 I have all the theory and I understand what's going on here right now. But they really were talking about how, like, that's the heart of intimacy, is let's go slow
Mm,
enough in this conversation that two things can happen. One, I can understand my own internal world so that I can kind of report that out to you. And two, let's go slowly enough that when you are talking about your world, I can really take it in, rather than that taking in where you're just listening long enough to figure out what you're going to say next, or how you're going
mhm.
to kind of prove them wrong. But
Yeah.
that really is intimacy, really, isn't it? Like, to say we're not the same. We're not the same.
Mhm,
And how I put together that moment where what my story is that you were thoughtless, you
mhm.
actually have a really different framing of that story. And can I slow down enough and be curious enough to see it from where you stand?
I love this, but what do we do and what can people do when their response, their natural response to being called out or to having someone point something out to them is extreme defensiveness? And how much do you see this in your couples work where, Dr. Harriet Lerner, who I love, she says, defensiveness is the arch enemy of listening.
Hmm.
So how do you see this getting in the way of people being able to consider their partner?
Well, let's make sure that I would like you to help me out with this. Like, let's make sure that we get really clear on what defensiveness looks and feels like, because
Mm.
I never like to throw the ladies under the bus, being being a lady. But I think
Mhm,
the thing I hear over and over again is women frequently talking about how the men in their lives are defensive. And I think
mhm,
male defensiveness has a particular kind of tone to it, which is a lot of explanation.
mhm,
Um, but I think women have a kind of defensiveness too, that often is about feeling like nobody understands how hard I'm trying. Nobody
mhm.
understands how hard I'm working. So
Yep.
to me, what defensiveness feels like, I mean, to me, when I get defensive, I kind of feel it right here in my throat. It's like a constriction and an
Mm,
urgency to be to get ahead of somebody else's
Right.
perception of
Yeah.
me. What does it feel like to you, or how do you kind of think about it?
Well, personally, I've worked, I was really defensive in my 20s. This was a real problem in my relationships because I worked so hard to be above reproach, being a,
Yeah.
a high functioning person, being a codependent person, being a high functioning codependent. It was like the worst thing that could happen is somebody calling me out, right? Because I'd worked so hard to be above reproach. So I would, when I was younger, I had a very visceral and reactive and hot. I was a little bit of a hothead. I didn't have, this is long before I had a daily meditation practice. I didn't have the space, but the feeling was like I need to quickly justify why I'm right, like super attached to being right. And I still, I've had a billion years of therapy. I'm 60 and I started when I was 19. So I've had a lot of years of therapy to work on it. And I feel like I can still feel the twinge of wanting to become defensive. But you learn to tolerate those feelings and you have enough good experiences. Like I'll always remind myself, because I've been, with my husband 27 years, and I'm like, in your heart of hearts, Tara, do you really think he's trying to make you feel bad? Or you really think that he thinks you're a jerk or whatever it is I'm saying? And I know that's not the truth. And I know that that's not his intention. So I think that I couldn't have done that though when I was 22. I didn't have the bandwidth and I didn't know myself well enough. So I do think that sort of going back to the self-reflection piece and the relational self-awareness piece is that each person in the dyad needs to be aware of what is your Achilles heel. If you have a tendency to become defensive, then it's on you, as it was on me, to work on that, to figure it out, to, you know, be compassionate with yourself, but to get the help that you need to stop because it really does
Really?
negatively impact. I mean, I can see it in my therapy clients every day.
Yes. Yes. It is, and like all of if our big theme tonight is healthy relationships, the things that we do that block kind of health and ease and emotional safety, there is an origin story for every single one, right? I always say I have yet to meet an adaptive behavior that I don't have a deep well of compassion for. Like
Yeah.
the behavior needs to change, we got to work on it, but I have deep compassion. So if somebody is sitting here tonight and they identify the defensiveness, go back, like rewind the tape to your family of origin and what is
Mm,
the story about why you needed to protest? What was the protest? And for lots of us, it was because we grew up in households where our behavior and our character were conflated
mm,
again and again and again. It wasn't that you left your backpack at home, it's that you are spacey. It
yep.
wasn't that you yelled at your sister, it's that you're an angry person. It
Mhm.
wasn't that you are taking a nap, it's that you're a lazy person, right? These ways in which our families maybe painted us with a very broad brush. And so the
Mhm.
protest is really a protest for self. Like, wait, hold on to me, hold
Mhm.
on to my complexity and my nuance. Let my behavior not be the sum total of who I am. So the work then is to offer compassion to the little girl or the little boy or the little self that developed that, kind of scramble to be seen, to be heard, to be understood, to be held in warm regard, to be given the benefit of the doubt, to
Mhm.
honor that person, even as you challenge the way that that behavior shows up today.
There's something about what you're saying that created like almost like a full body exhale, where it's acknowledging that even if we're doing things now that are dysfunctional, let's say, that they made sense to our small self. They were adaptive. And I think that it's hard to really wrap our head around, but the truth is the adaptive functionings of childhood that help us survive, many of us, rough situations where we're protecting ourselves, they become maladaptive in adulthood, but you make sense. And I think just being able to give ourselves that grace, like I am this way for a reason, and I still want to change it.
Yeah. For me, my defensiveness is the sort of like the being beyond reproach. And for me,
Mhm.
it was about, in my family of origin, having parents who were struggling with addiction and
Mhm.
feeling, as the oldest daughter, very responsible for the family to be okay. Like I had to be okay so the family could be okay. And so
Mhm.
when I get feedback from my husband about about my less than perfect ways, I have to slow down enough to be like, wait,
Mm,
it's okay. I can screw something up, and it doesn't mean that everything's going to fall apart. And as you were saying before, like, do I really in my bones believe, can I trust him to hold on
yeah.
to this screw up and his deep love for me? Mm-hmm.
Yes. And of course, obviously you've been together many years and you do, but I think that it's complex when you're
Mm-hmm.
first sort of getting into, can I actually do that? I want to talk a little bit about, if we can, about, I recommend Love Every Day to my clients all the time because for me, it's the perfect book that it's a resource when people, or even you guys who are here right now, if you're like, I want to do something, but I don't have all the time in the world to do something. 365-day book, that's what this is so helpful. And I would have clients coming back and being like, instead of feeling overwhelmed, I feel like I'm kind of doing something every day to help my relationship and myself, and that's what I want to do. So I'm just curious as to what inspired you to put out a book, this type of a book.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, it's a way of honoring little Allie because I grew up as such a book nerd. So I think becoming an author is such a way of honoring the
Yeah.
way in which one of the ways I think I kept myself emotionally safe when I was little was
Mm,
having books. And I, at some point along the way, I had a daily book that was for, I think, probably children of alcoholics when I
mhm,
was a teenager. And so there's a way that to offer a 365 book is a way of honoring the
mhm,
365 books that have just meant the world to me. That little bite has always been such
mhm,
a model or a template that has made sense to me. But what was so interesting is when I got deeper into the creation of this book, I noticed these very powerful parallels. One is a parallel to the healing journey, which is that,
mhm,
when you're in therapy, you're kind of grinding it out week after week with little incremental kind of pieces of the puzzle. It's not you go to therapy and you are presented with this one unitary theory that makes your whole life make
mhm.
sense. No, it's the
Right.
kind of hard fought little piece here, revisit this, tweak this, So there's something then about the little bite sized increments that parallels the healing journey, which takes place
Mhm,
over steps forward and steps back.
mhm,
But it also, I think, parallels how our relationships work, which is especially in romantic relationships. I think we grow
mm,
up with this idea that romantic love is the sweeping gesture. It's the rose
mm,
petals on the bed. It's the love letter that kind of summarizes the entire thing. It's the trip to wherever the heck, and that's where love lives. And certainly those are beautiful and those are
mhm,
oftentimes welcome and cherished, and they become little touch points and shared memories. But what the research shows, what John Gottman's research, especially I'm thinking of,
mhm,
shows is it's the little stuff. It's the little stuff. It's the little, when your partner is telling you a story about their day, that you're putting the phone down and you're giving your full attention. It's the commitment to go for a walk after dinner, even if there's a party that wants to just kind of, isolate or shut down. It's the moment that you bite your tongue, not in a self-abandoning way, but just
mhm.
in like okay, that comment is just not going to elevate the conversation here. So
Yep.
it's those little like forks in the road that we have
Mm.
over and over again in our relationships. I think there's also like that kind of a parallel as well.
I love the idea of like a daily mental health relationship snack of like goodness. It's almost like a nutritional little snack, especially if you have a partner who's sort of willing to read it together. When I first got it, Vic and I would read it at night, and we've done this before with other daily books. We loved it, but there's something so I don't know, just can bring you closer together. And I feel like for some folks who maybe don't want to get into therapy, it can be a lot less threatening. Like if you have a partner who's not, so maybe you're into,
Right.
your own evolution, maybe your partner's not, so it's a way that can sort of bring you together that is less threatening.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I think that oftentimes happens that one member of a family is more deeply in this work than other members of the family, and certainly one partner is. And what I always say is that there's a world of difference between a partner who is reluctant or this is not their natural orientation.
Mhm,
That person is different than a person who holds introspection in contempt, who
Mhm.
just is rolling their eyes and doesn't believe in therapy. I think those are very different kinds of situations. We're not all, it's not like it's not a staircase. There's not levels here. And so to have somebody who just orients, like they're somebody who's willing to engage in a little bit,
Mhm.
let that go a long way. Because
Yes.
when you celebrate and reinforce and express gratitude for the little bit of introspection, the little daily dose, then that motivates them to do a bit more and do a bit more. But they may never, we don't need sameness. In fact,
Right.
complementarity is kind of lovely. And I think sometimes too deeply introspective people in relationship can get a little navel gate. I've had couples where I'm like, okay, no more relationship talk. You get to have 20 minutes a day of relationship talk. We're not
Yes.
doing 3-hour marathons. You don't need to go have the relationship. Don't talk about
Exactly.
the
You're like,
relationship.
have some fun, please. I would appreciate
Please
that.
stop talking.
So when we come to relationship dynamics, right? If we're looking at, what we're doing here is we're cultivating healthy relationship dynamics in a variety of different relationships. So we're sort of talking about romantic relationships, but obviously we have relationship dynamics in all of ours. So what do you see as some of in your therapy practice as some of the most problematic dysfunctional relationship dynamics? And then I'll tell you what I see.
Yeah. Well, I just want to go right to the overfunctioning, underfunctioning. When I
Hmm.
launched my podcast just about 3 years ago, I do like you do. I do a blend of having guests on the show
Hmm.
and then creating solo episodes. And
Yep.
one of my early solo episodes was about addressing the overfunctioning underfunctioning dynamic because it's something that I have seen in my practice for, all of the years that I've been doing couple
Mhm.
therapy. And I'm fascinated by it. I think it's so easy for the overfunctioner to put the underfunctioner in a box and put a big old label on their head. I think it's easy
Mhm.
for the underfunctioning partner to kind of point a finger at the overfunctioning partner. So I really want to do a juicy episode where we looked at this as a dynamic, as a system, where the more
Mhm.
this person is doing so much, the less this person is doing. And it was an episode that was very well received. And, people kind of come back to again and again. And then my dear friend Terri Cole, comes out with her newest book, which is called Too Much. And Terri actually takes this overfunctioning, underfunctioning dynamic in a really powerful direction by looking deeply at the dynamics of high functioning codependency. And I think it is your book really invites the person who's struggling with high functioning
Yeah.
codependency to look in the mirror, understand where this comes from and the
Right.
impact of it, but it for sure is part of a relational system. So can you kind of orient us to what the heck high functioning codependency is?
I would love to. That's
Mm-hmm.
all I think about. Well, let's think about codependency. According to me, it's when you are overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the situations, the circumstances, the relationships, the finances, the career of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace. Right. So many of us are lovers, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers. Obviously, we love our people. Obviously, we're invested. But when you're a codependent and when you're a high functioning codependent, you're overly invested, meaning you feel overly responsible for the feeling states of other people and for the outcomes of other people. So the reason why I expanded the definition of codependency to include high functioning codependency is that in my therapy practice of also 27 years, I had all of these super capable women in particular who are sort of the masters of the universe. And if I would point out, oh, hey, what you're talking about, this is a codependent relational pattern we should talk about, there would be an immediate rejection of the word codependency. They would be like, no, I'm the one who's doing everything. I'm making all the money. I'm managing all the people. I'm doing all the emotional labor. What are you talking about? I'm not. And so I realized, oh, my clients don't know what codependency is. They're sort of stuck in a time warp and they think it's only Melody Beatty, codependent no more. You have to be enabling an alcoholic to be a codependent. So I realized there needed to be sort of an updating of the definition itself, but it was specific to my clients because the irony with high functioning codependency is that the more capable you are, the less codependency looks like codependency, but it still is. Because if we look at the base of this, it is a covert or overt bid to control the outcomes of other people, right? Even if you're doing it with a loving heart,
Mm.
that's what that is.
Mhm.
So I feel like the over and under functioning, there's a big part of this that happens with high functioning codependent relationships where I used to say, like, kidding, that in my 20s, I could take a perfectly capable boyfriend and turn him into an under functioner in 2 weeks or less. Like, actually. Now, what would that look like and how could I do that? It's sort of, if you're a high functioning codependent, you have there's a hyper independence that goes along with this. And I remember with boyfriends, I just thought it was just faster, easier, more efficient if I did whatever the thing was. So there's different mantras for high functioning codependence, but one is, I got it.
Yep.
Somebody makes an offer and you go, I got it. The other is, it has to be me,
Mhm.
because we really don't trust
Mhm.
that either people are going to show up or that they're going to show up and do it the way we think it should be done. So this can really create, and I've seen it over and over again in my therapy practice, this can really create resentment within a couple. And you have both people being resentful, right? So you have the person who's over functioning, who feels like nobody has any idea of all the crap that I do around here. I feel underappreciated,
Yep.
even if you're volunteering
Yep.
to do all the crap. And even if you volunteer because you don't think they're as capable as you are, ultimately, that over giving and that over functioning breeds feelings of contempt and resentment. There's just no way it doesn't. And then you have the person who, as my boyfriends were, might have been perfectly capable. You just get to a point where you stop offering to do things if someone is endlessly saying no. Now, I'm not blaming the high functioning codependent for everything, right? But, the cracked pot will attract the perfectly cracked lid, right? We find where we fit with people. But since we're talking about dysfunctional relational patterns, this is one that I think is really damaging and is so common.
Yeah.
And, why is it? I mean, there's a million reasons why. We can get into it. We don't need to get into it. But I mean, most of us were raised and praised to be self-abandoning codependents
Yep.
as women. We just were.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that sets us up. And especially if you are highly capable, it sets you up for this over and under functioning dynamic.
I think one of the things that the partner of the high functioning codependent person, I think the person with high functioning codependent patterns can be a little bit oblivious to how the other feels, because my story is, well, I'm doing everything. How is this not an amazing deal for my partner? Right?
Yeah.
Like I do it all. I look at all the things I do for
Yep.
them. How is it not a
Mhm.
great deal for them? And it is, I think one of the ones that I see a lot is the partner, the partner sees how the high functioning codependent person is exhausting themselves,
Yep.
because they're not just over functioning with you, it's for their mom and the school board and work and the friend down the street. And so the partner very often is like, Stop, slow down, breathe. And the partner is often then the sounding board for all of the complaints that the high functioning
Yep.
codependent person, right? It's like, you
Yep.
wouldn't believe it. And I had to do this and da 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 da.
Yep.
And so it is, I think that the partner can oftentimes feel like they're just sort of at the mercy. But what are some of the other, what are some of the other consequences of being in
Mhm.
relation to somebody who is struggling with high functioning codependency?
Well, if we look at the costs, right? What is the cost to the HFC, as we call it? Burnout, exhaustion, resentment, and being unknown,
Mm,
which is really super painful. There's like an existential crisis that can come from this
yeah.
not being known, because as HFCs, trust me, we have a stadium full of data about all of the people in our lives. We know everybody's preferences, desires, limits, deal breakers. We know it all, but we don't prioritize our own
Yeah.
enough to even let people consider us. We're all like, well, I'm fine. I'm easy breezy. Don't worry about it. But again, all of this stuff comes with a cost. So that's, and there's also physical costs, the burnout stuff. I see a lot of autoimmune disorders in my practice, TMJ, insomnia, lots of different physical things from the amount of cortisol that is pulsating through a system that's sort of always hypervigilant about what's happening, what might happen, what could happen. We're always thinking to avoid, we're always thinking about other people. We're running the ship of our families usually. We might be also CEOs, CFOs, therapists with private practices or whatever it is that we're doing. But then if we look at what is the cost to our relationships?
Mhm.
What is the cost to the other person? The cost to the other person is their autonomy,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
The cost to the other person is they have a right to succeed or fail. They have a right to thrive or flail, right? To even flailing. It is
Yeah.
part of what we all have a right to do in our lives. But when you're with an HFC, we don't want anyone to have pain, and we don't want you to be in trouble, and we don't want you to have consequences for your actions, and we want to jump in. And it's not even a want to until you can really identify and understand. It is a compulsion.
To
I
have to.
talk about,
Yeah.
yes,
Mhm.
exactly, Ali. It's a have to.
Mhm.
And I talk about, and how I teach it in the book and in my membership, is that we're never getting cured, but we can be in recovery.
Mhm.
So, right.
Mhm.
So just like I'm in recovery for alcohol,
Mhm.
we can be in recovery for these behaviors that are very ingrained
Mhm.
and very compulsive, where
Mhm.
there's almost no space between the other person expressing their problem and our auto advice giving
Yeah.
and us jumping in because we have a fix. But
Mhm.
when you think about the other person, nobody likes to be managed.
Mm-mm.
Nobody likes to feel like a problem or a project.
Yeah.
It is very dehumanizing. And even if that isn't your intention, because I promise you, listen, why am I writing a book about this? Obviously, you teach what you most need to learn, is what they say. And it's friggin' true. But the reality is, I literally thought this was love.
Mhm.
I didn't know
Mhm.
that there was such an element of control in these relationships. And so I feel like if anyone is identifying with this, just self-compassion is where it's at. It's the same thing that we were talking about before. We all have really good reasons
Yes.
for these behaviors, but you deserve so much more than this compulsive behavior will create in your life. Because what I've really seen is that it creates, like, these behaviors compulsively will create a glass ceiling of our own making
Mhm.
when it comes to our success in business, when it comes to intimacy in relationships,
Mhm.
because there will be, like, the end of the bandwidth. Like, there's only so much of this bleeding bandwidth everywhere that we can do. And so part of the process of getting into recovery is taking back our energy, really being able to realize what is our side of the street, what is someone else's side of the street, respecting
Even
other people's rights.
even though that's the uncomfortable, that's the discomfort, right? There's comfort. I mean, there's a consequence for the doing more, but there's a comfort in the doing more. And
Yes.
it is in the stepping back and allowing
Yes.
that the discomfort comes up. Now I have my sadness. Now I have my anxiety. So it is not, this is not sunshine and puppies when you
No.
step out of these. It's incredibly
Mm-mm.
uncomfortable to allow someone else to have their experience in the way. And yes, you've named the self-compassion, and I think especially about as mothers, like when you are, or parents, as parents,
Yeah.
when you have a little one, you are doing for the little one, and
Hmm.
as they grow, you still are doing for,
Yeah.
and that is an entire a very dynamic learning curve of, like, where is the line between doing for, like, doing too much and
Yeah.
doing enough. And my best friend and I have kids, emerging adult kids, and she has this image. She's like, we're the books on the shelf. We have to become the books on the shelf, where the
Mm.
kid comes and we are a resource for them. We're not coaching from the center of the field. But that
Yeah.
is a like that is when you have held a little person in your arms and done for them. Like, it really
Hmm.
is a learning process, an iterative learning process. So
Yes.
we both have tons of compassion for the difficulty and the gray, right?
Hmm.
Where's the line between care and codependency? And can I do
Yes.
something? Can I do something? In your book, you have a really lovely chart of when you are doing something from a place of love and care, and when you're doing
Mhm.
something from a place of codependency.
Yes, and I think that one thing that people can think about doing right now, if you identify with this, if you're watching this now or after the fact, and you go, "Oh my God, like I'm an auto advice giver. What do I do?" You can right now. Doesn't mean you'll never give kids or anyone else your advice, but what if it's just not the first stop on the train?
Yeah.
What if the first thing that you say when anyone has any kind of a situation is, "What do you think you should do?"
Right.
Because your gut instinct is good. I trust your gut instinct, and you're the one in the situation. So really, you know more than me, and I'm here to work it out with you. It's like it's so much more loving to be in the trenches with our people when they're in pain than it is for us to try to tie it up in a neat bow to assuage our own anxiety.
Yeah. I was thinking about this. I don't know if it's, I think it's a butterfly, like a little caterpillar guy when he's in the chrysalis, if
Mm,
you, if you see him struggling to get out of the chrysalis, and if you try to get in there and help, like
mm,
the little critter will die, right? Like it is in the struggle, right? That part has to happen. And so we think that kind of like holding space is like passive. It's so active. It's so active to be near
mhm.
somebody and only giving the amount of support, that is absolutely necessary, and asking first. Asking
Yes.
first, what are you feeling like you need?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And even asking, how can I best support you?
Yeah.
Even if a friend calls or Vic is at me or my husband's having a problem, literally asking and hey, maybe they won't know and I'll just be with them or sit with them. But there's something about asking instead of making any assumption. Because so much of the time I'm just projecting what I would like someone to do for me, which may not be the thing that makes them feel the most supported or loved.
Yeah. Yeah. And checking in with ourselves about the knee jerk desire to give
Mm,
advice, I think is sometimes to seem important, to feel important.
yeah.
And as you write about so beautifully in the book, it is to make somebody else's pain stop so that my pain stops. So it is ultimately what feels loving and like it's about you is actually about me.
Yeah. And that's a hard realization,
Ooh.
but again, don't be too rough on yourself if you feel it, because there's a part of you that is a lover, and that's the reason you don't want people to be in pain, and we understand it. But there's something so profoundly liberating when we can tolerate more feelings, a more expanded amount of feelings and other people's feelings, because that is love. Fixing people is a compulsion, and hanging with people, right, and really holding space. Like in my mind, that's really what that means. Can I hold space for someone who's going through something? It means, can I be with you and not try to fix you?
Mm-hmm.
And if you want my advice, after we talk all about what you think, I will tell you if I have something valuable to say, but not in a compulsive way, in a loving way, in a thoughtful way, in a mindful way.
It is, this is why, for those of us in this conversation right now who are a bit older, who remember when Dr. John Gray wrote the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From
Mhm,
Venus, that
mhm.
made about a gazillion dollars. The
Yeah.
idea here was that men, kind of rush in with solutions, and women
Mhm.
want empathy. So even though we've been talking a lot about high functioning codependency, that sort of gendered nature of it, I think that
Yeah.
is often, I spend a lot of time with men in my practice, really helping them trust that it is not their advice and their fixing and their solutions that is the medicine that is so valuable. It is their steady presence. And I think
Yeah.
that is oftentimes a growing edge for men too, because we teach men to kind of get in there and, get in there and make it better.
Yeah.
And it is oftentimes takes a lot of practice, a lot of kind of getting the reps in, to quote our Resma Menakem, who talks about
Mm,
getting your reps in, like just
yeah.
practicing that art of being present with your partner. That is healing. It's not fixing or problem solving necessarily.
Right. It's so true. And I think that this is where the communication comes in, and being able to have a conversation that says, what would really feel so good right now if you could just listen compassionately. I'm not seeking input. I know I'll figure it out, but it really matters to me that you know that I'm in pain, and just you being here and being with me
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah.
And because really, again, partners just want to know, I think either partner, that our presence matters. And
Mhm.
that really, again, I agree with you, and that men feel like they have to fix, but it's not necessarily what we're looking for. We want understanding. When I used to work with couples years ago, it would always be the same conversation. It sounds trite almost, but it's the truth, that there would be the husband a lot of times would want more sex,
Mhm.
and the wife a lot of times would want more conversation, more understanding, and more help with kids and the house. And I was like, what if we thought about helping and deeper conversations more as like foreplay, because that's how your wife experiences it.
Mhm.
No, it's not the other thing, right? It's not just about the physicality. It's about the consideration and how much that makes you feel like you can be vulnerable and soften with
Mhm.
someone who is thinking about you, you know?
Yep. I call that the cosmic irony of heterosexuality, that it is oftentimes right for, for those who've been socialized as men, sex is the
Hmm.
gateway to connection. And for women, oftentimes it is connection that's the gateway to sex. And in that way,
Yeah.
it feels impossible, but it ends up being a cycle where the more, the more. Yeah. And it is,
Yeah.
I think that much more in my recent years, I do a better job of really honoring I think we as a culture do a real disservice when we talk about that men only want one thing. That is
Hmm.
a really limiting stereotype, because when you talk to men about what they're seeking in sex, it is very often that feeling of connection, that feeling of
Hmm.
softness, that feeling of vulnerability, that feeling of emotional safety. And that is just a very powerful avenue. And so in that way, everyone is aligned, and to not see one person's definition of intimacy as right and the other person's definition of intimacy as wrong, and to really understand that. But yeah, I'm so glad. I mean, that's been one of the exciting developments, I think, in the last even just like 5 or so number of years, is talking much more about mental load and invisible, labor in the home and domestic labor. I think it's so important that we have really started to look at how domestic life, how partners handle domestic life casts a really big impact on every other facet of their relationship. And I'm so excited about like Eve Rodsky's work.
Oh,
She wrote a
great.
beautiful book called Fair Play. And it's just something that is, I think we're in an exciting time of liberating all of us from these very narrow definitions of, because you live in this gendered body, this is
Yep.
how you should be or what you should do. And I think it's an expansive time in all the best of ways.
I totally agree. And I feel like it's liberating for everyone, because
Yeah.
so much of the time, when you think about, especially, high functioning codependency, where people don't know how much you do, people don't know what you're doing, right? You're choosing to do it, but you don't know. And part of this, the whole thing with fair play and bringing more, having more equitability in a relationship, is really people talking about who's doing what.
Hmm.
What does it look like? I was being interviewed the other day by someone who, she was talking about, she's like, oh, this is a perfect time to have this conversation because I'm having a 7 hour meeting, family meeting tomorrow, but mostly with my husband, about what's going on. And she's like, my husband is good and he helps. But even when he does, I'm still so resentful because when he does, he actually wants me to throw him a parade, which makes me want to tell him the 4,000 more things that I do every day than he does.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, maybe you don't want to say it like that, but there is something valuable about really looking like, what are we doing? What are we adding? And is there a way to make it more equitable, especially if someone is resentful, as this person certainly was? She was like, I'm so excited to have it be a little bit more balanced. And I was like, and what about? It's okay to give gratitude, but you could tell she was so resentful she didn't really want to, you know?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And that is, I mean, change is hard. Change is
Hmm.
hard. And those first iterations of change, it's like,
Yeah.
right. It's like the what took you so long, or see, that wasn't
Hmm.
so hard. And it is. I think
Yep.
that's why it's so important to have a therapist to kind of say all that stuff to,
Yep.
so that then in the relationship you can have probably the more productive response, which is the thank you, like honoring,
Yep.
of course, that part of you that was so hungry for so long,
Yep.
honoring that, and then doing the thing that is effective for the relationship. And that's what, yeah, that's sort of the heart of a healthy relationship, right, is like understanding that there's the knee-jerk stuff that
Mm-hmm.
we get it, we understand why it's there,
Yep.
and then there is the response that when we pause and we can say, okay, what can I say right now that keeps me oriented on the person that I want to be in the relationship
Yeah.
and the kind of relationship I want to have, and to never for a second underestimate our own power in
Right.
co-creating that. I think it's so
Yes.
easy, especially those of us who grew up feeling really invisible in our
Mm-hmm.
families of origin.
Yep.
It's really easy to miss how the look on my face,
Yeah.
conveys
Is
something, or how
saying a
I
lot.
answer the phone says a lot. Like, to really not
Yep.
underestimate our own power, and to know that
Yes.
we get to use that power for good, and
Yes.
that the words we
True.
say and the energy we bring,
Yep.
makes a difference, and it shapes the dynamic.
Yes. All right. Let's move it on into Q&A.
Okay,
So,
let's do it.
woohoo. So, question came in. What is the best way to ask for help for my partner or child without breaking down and just doing it myself?
Hmm. Well, I'll go first on this one, which is, I remember, Todd and I had a pretty like traditional division of labor in our home when our kids were growing up.
Mhm.
And I remember, like, on a weekend morning, if he, got the kids ready and then brought the kids downstairs, and, our daughter's wearing like whatever, yellow pants and a purple shirt. I remember, if it was not
Mhm.
weather appropriate, that's one thing. But if it
Mm.
was just a kind of fashion sense kind of a thing, like, that was my moment to pause and to
Mhm.
just like anchor within myself that was one
Mhm.
less thing I had to do. He chose
Yep.
an outfit I never would have chosen. The girl's
Yep.
got a gorgeous wardrobe, but no, the task was done. The child looks fine, let's
Mhm.
move on with the day. And so sort of like rewarding, like honoring the B plus rather than insisting on the A plus, like
Mhm.
just not letting good enough be not letting perfect be the enemy of good. So that's
Yep.
part of it, is just knowing that these things are not life or death. These are
Yep.
misdemeanors, not felonies. Like, trying to kind of like decide what's the hill you want to die on, what's not, and then knowing there's
Yep.
so many hills that are not worth dying on. That's my first
Total,
thought.
totally agree. Because here's the thing. I think the question is that the question isn't necessarily how do I do it? The question is, how do you stop yourself from, your question is not how do I ask the question for help? It's how do I stop myself from doing it? And I think you have to really look at is there a perfectionism, something that you're suffering from? And exactly what Dr. Solomon said, can we just go, okay, I'm going to ask for help and I'm not going to micromanage the help.
Yeah.
So that would be my 2 cents there. Okay. Next question. How can I effectively manage defensiveness when receiving feedback? I often find myself becoming very emotional or taking feedback personally.
Yeah. Well, feedback is personal. So it makes sense
Hmm.
that you take it personally, because it is something coming towards you, right? That is about you. So I think one thing that I try to keep in mind is that there's a kind of courage in giving somebody feedback. So,
Hmm.
you know, like, I do this a lot with my husband. Like, when he gives me feedback and I want to give in to the whole pity party, I suck, yeah, but I really try to put myself in his shoes and say, damn, I know it's not easy to come to me because of this pattern. He knows my tendencies. And so I really try to kind of like center his experience and the kind of courage it takes to give feedback. I try to imagine, I keep in my mind that he's bringing this up because he cares about the quality of our connection, right?
Hmm.
Somebody, I think, you know this from your work with couples. To me, the time the relationship really goes sour is when people stop giving feedback, because it's like,
Yeah.
what the heck is the point? Why would I even try? So the fact
Yep.
that you are getting feedback, it's like somebody is invested. They're in the ring. They want to keep refining this relationship. So I think those are some things that I really invite you to keep in mind, to tell yourself, this example is not the sum total of your character. And
Hmm.
then I think maybe at a separate time, I think it really is helpful for people in relationship to talk about how to give feedback. I've worked on this a lot on the Reimagining Love podcast, because I think
Hmm.
sometimes you got to know, you have to, it's on the giver's job. It's
Mhm.
the giver's job to know what their receiver needs. If you are prone to defensiveness, the giver of the feedback then needs to make sure that they're coming in slow, that they're being gentle,
Yep.
that they're leading with positivity, that they are
Yep.
affirming. So it's not, I don't think the goal is for all of us to just be tough as nails. Come on, give it to me. No, I think there is an art to how you give feedback,
Yes.
when you give feedback, that
Yep.
you really like kind of soften up and cushion it, because feedback is tough.
Yes, I totally agree. It's painful. For me, what helped was thinking about it that way, but I always had something sort of ready to say. Instead of the thing I wanted to say, which was to defend my actions, I would say, "Thank you so much for caring enough to give me that feedback." Even when that was hard to say for me, I would say it because if not, I'd say the other thing. And then there was a little bit
Yep.
of an opening where there's more room. So I feel like in the beginning, you want to have maybe something to say that's not the not the defensive thing you would normally say. It could be
Right.
helpful.
Yes, because nature abhors a vacuum, as Aristotle said. You got to have something else. The other thing to have ready,
Mhm.
and this one is like this is the cheat code, I think, for sure, which is when you are getting feedback, the other way to avoid the defensiveness is just to repeat back what you've heard. I will use
Mhm.
that. I'll repeat back what I've heard. If I'm reflecting you back to you, what I'm hearing you say, am I getting this right? If I'm
Mhm.
saying that to you,
Yep.
then I can't be defending and explaining and
Ooh,
rationalizing. And that
I love that.
also slows me down. And by
Yeah.
saying what your experience is, it also is kind of syncing up my empathy circuits, because now I can start
Mm.
to, ooh, yeah. And I can imagine how that didn't feel good. So
Yep.
never underestimate the power of reflecting back to the person what you're
Yep.
hearing them say.
Love it. All right, next question. Is it okay to ask for a redo when you're in an argument or just having an off moment with someone?
You want to do this one first?
Sure.
I love this one.
I love the idea of asking for a do-over, sort of.
Yeah.
And I think, listen, you can't control, right? Your side of the street is asking. If you want to be more direct, you can just apologize for being off, or you can apologize if there was something that you said in the argument that you feel like warrants that. But I also think it's a creative way of just being like, hey, Vegas, can we just take that from the top? So
Right.
I feel like people can respond to
Mhm.
that well. I would if someone was like, that just started bad. Can we start? Because again, what we're really saying is I want to do it better, is what the message is in that. So what do you think, Annie?
Oh, I love it. When you said, like when you did the little like gesture, like, like rewind, redo, I felt that. I felt
Yeah.
like, yeah, I would be like, I would, it feels loving,
Hmm.
because you're invested in trying again. I can feel that you want to like do right by me.
Yep.
It also adds, I mean, I think there's anytime humor is tricky, right? Because humor is much like touch. It's completely contextual, and
Yeah.
can sometimes feel like it lands poorly. But those little, the John Gottman and Julie Gottman, his wife, have done 40 years of research on
Hmm.
intimate relationships primarily. And they found that the happiest couples have all these little like verbal and nonverbal white flags that they wave in a
Yep.
in a conflict. And so I could imagine, the redo. I'll pair my redo with like a little shimmy and a jazz hand, like redo,
Yeah.
like don't like how that went. That adds
Yep.
it's a little self-deprecating, it's a little disarming.
Yep.
It can help us remember that this is not the sum total of our relationship is not captured in this
Right.
in this moment.
Yes. Love that. All right. We have a few more, so let's get through them.
Good.
How can we tell if we're out of alignment with our authenticity, and how does that impact how we show up in our relationships? I'm looking to be fully authentic instead of just saying what people want to hear.
Okay. I have this idea of authenticity has been coming up a lot lately, and I'm really kind of like soapboxy about. I think what we get wrong about authenticity is we think of
Mhm.
it as an individual personality trait. Either I'm authentic or I'm not authentic,
Mhm.
rather than it being a quality of connection. So I don't
Mm.
know that you can do authenticity all on your own, because you may be out of alignment in a relationship because that person, you have some data, you have some felt sense that your full self isn't welcome there.
Mm.
That's not inauthenticity. That is reading the vibe. That is, not playing all your cards. That is being a little bit discerning. But I hear you that what you are really seeking and craving is a relationship where where what's happening in here can be expressed. And I think that's something that you and the other person get to kind of curate together. And that then the way it feels is you start to feel like something is mismatched. I'm saying yes with my mouth, but my body is saying no. And so then you seek the relationships where you're like, wait a minute, I just said yes, but you know what? I'm in recovery from people pleasing and saying yes. And so I want to slow this down and really check in with my body for a minute.
Yep. Love it. All right. I missed one in the beginning, so I'm going to go back to the top.
Okay.
Can you please talk about how we can bring the skills of relational self-awareness to parenting?
Yeah. I mean, it's so much of what we've been talking about. I think we get this idea of defensiveness with our kids is really big, and it's justified because I mean, most of us were raised with a very much a top down kind of a notion of the parent is always right. You don't apologize to your kids. And I love this evolution of parenting where we're seeing it much more as a relationship. And so I think there is so much space around repair, apology, owning our stuff. When our kids are little, we're not going to be like giving them our whole origin story why we respond that way. But we can notice, it is my kids were the best teachers to me. They still are the best teachers to me around where my tender spots live, right? The reaction that's this big inside of you holds a clue for you. So just your willingness to be deeply curious when you want control over your kid, when you're having that, what's my kid going to do? Like to study your reactivity, and your kids are going to give you so many opportunities to do that. And so resist the urge to kind of put it on your kid, which is hard. We live in a world where kids are getting diagnoses left, right, and center. And there are lots of things that are going on for our kids, but to keep yourself in the mix. Okay, why do I have this particular reaction to this kid's behavior? And it oftentimes has to do with our own. My kid is talking back to me when I was little, and never in a million years would have. But then what I would say as your therapist is like, look at you raising a kid who'll talk back to you. They must feel so safe in your presence in a way that you never could have when you were little.
Beautiful.
What do you want to add there?
No, I feel like you covered it. I mean, I feel like that's exactly right. And that it's an opportunity that it's really, you physically know it when there's something off in the way that you are relating to your kid. But I feel like you really nailed it, Dr. Solomon. I think that is our last question.
Did we do them all? That's so cool.
We did. There's Kat.
Those are great questions. Really such thoughtful questions.
We have an excellent audience, wonderful questions. Thank you so much, both to Dr. Solomon and Terri. It has been a pleasure having you. Some gems that I picked up from, and I'm sure our audience picked up more, but I loved when you spoke about parents or friends being like books on a bookshelf, being a resource, and the chrysalis kind of being on the side, but just gauging how much you actually need to help. And then saying, can we take that from the top? I love that for the redo. That's a great phrase we can all kind of put into our back pocket. So thank you so much. I definitely recommend checking out both books, Love Every Day and Too Much. They are fantastic. And there's a lot more that we just didn't have time to cover. But this was, I think, a really great starting point for everyone. And of course, I hope that you'll come visit us for future upcoming Spark Your Health talks. And in the post-event communication, we will put a survey. We love hearing from everyone. We would love to get feedback on other topics that you want to hear about. But with that being said, I want to thank you both again for your time this evening and for our audience for tuning in. And I hope that everyone stays well and has a wonderful evening.